Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel, hope you're all good and well. So time for another album ranking video this time. This time I'm tackling the discography of Katatonia, the Swedish doom slash gothic metal band. I mean, they've evolved a bit over the years, over their 30 or so year career. They were formed in 1991 by Jonas Ringser and Anders Nyström, and they have put out 12 studio albums since then, and have kind of evolved a bit. As I say, they started with a death doom metal style. By the time you get to Discouraged Ones, they've gone very depressive, very gothic, very gloomy. And Jonas Ringser even sounds a little bit like Robert Smith, perhaps if Robert Smith went full doom metal. And by the time you actually get to Viva Emptiness, I think that Jonas Ringser, he kind of, his vocals become more refined, slightly more moderated. So they're a bit lighter in tone. It's kind of like he softens his vocals a little bit for those later albums and to date. So you've seen a little bit of an evolution both in the band's music, but also it's interesting how Jonas's vocals have changed. I know that after the first two albums, I think after the first album, he stopped singing harsh vocals because he was worried about his vocal cords. So one or two interesting things about this band anyway. And yeah, they sort of not had too many lineup changes. The only lineup change that really I always remember was the departure of the Norman Brothers in 2009. Other than that, not so I've had a few changes to the lineup, but Jonas Ringser and Anders Nyström have always been at the helm. So let's crack on with this album ranking without any further wasting of time. I'm going to start with my number 12, my least favourite album, and work my way to my favourite. So at number 12, we've got Discouraged Ones from 1998. Yeah, this album was just like the beginning of the kind of second era, second coming of Katatonia. I find this album a bit of a drag, a bit of a crawl, to be honest. And whenever I say that about a doom metal album, it always feels a bit strange, a bit like I'm kind of contradicting myself, because it's slow music, it's always going to be a bit of a crawl with this style, but there's not much interesting happening here for me. Dynamics, songwriting, not many songs that I particularly enjoy, and I don't think Jonas's vocal style is particularly well refined on this album either. It feels like he's starting anew with something new. So he's trying something new even, and it's just not quite there for me yet on this album. Some great tracks, Dead House, Saw You Drown, Quiet Worlds amongst those for me. But yeah, this is my least favourite album from Katatonia, Discouraged Ones. Next up at number 11, we have Dance of December Souls, which is their debut album actually. Maybe quite a popular one amongst fans, or particularly those who enjoy the very old era of Katatonia, with Dance of December Souls and Brave Murder Day being in that era. And I suppose it's one of those kind of early albums that sort of has that sort of almost iconic status. Perhaps slightly less so than Brave Murder Day, but the production on this album for me is a slight thing where it is very, very old school sounding, you know. It also, I don't think, is a great album for me personally. I do think it gets a little repetitive sounding, although I do like the longer track on this album, which is called Tomb of Insomnia. I think that's a great track. But yeah, generally I find this one another difficult album to get through. It's not a bad album at all, by any stretch of the imagination. It's still pretty decent. But yeah, Dance of December Souls is just less for me. Number 10 is their most recent album, Sky Void of Stars. This is a good album. It's a good album. It takes a while to settle in. It takes a while to sink in for you to enjoy it, I think. For me, the problem with this one is it's just very familiar sounding. It sounds like some Katatonia songs on here. I felt like I've heard this before. They sounded so familiar. I just felt like this sounds like something I've heard on Dead End Kings or something on City Burials. I just felt like it was Katatonia revisited a bit. But there was good songs on here still. I particularly loved Austerity, Opaline. Opaline was a grower, you know, and that was actually one of the tracks I really liked. It didn't sound so much like Katatonia I'd heard before as such, maybe. And it really grew on me. At first I wasn't sure about that track, but then I ended up loving it after several listens. So, and No Beacon to Illuminate are Fall, I think it's the final track, and that's a great way to finish the album off. So there are highlights on Sky Void of Stars for me, but it just sounds a little familiar for Katatonia, I think, by this point. And it's hard by their 12th album to not sound familiar, right? But yeah, Sky Void of Stars comes in here. Number 10. At number 9, we've got probably an unpopular, low, an album that's pretty low in my ranking. Now, I think Quest for Metal, I watched his ranking. There weren't many Katatonia album rankings, actually, I don't think, on YouTube. But I did watch his, and he put this album is his number 1 and it's my number 9. So it's interesting how people view different albums differently and stuff. But yeah, for me, Last Fair Deal Gone Down is just from an era of Katatonia. It's that kind of 3-album era for me, which includes Discouraged Ones and Tonight's Decision. I'm just not quite as in Jonas' vocals in this era. I do think there are great songs on this album. You've got Tear Gas, Tonight's Music, The Future of Speech. It's a brilliant track on this album, I think. It's a strong album, but it's just not one I go back to much. I don't find a lot of replay value in this one for me. I do really like the clean acoustic version they did a live performance of, I think. Was it Sanctitude? They did a clean version of Tear Gas and it sounded absolutely wonderful. So maybe I'd like this album more in that kind of a style. But anyway, for me, it's my number 9 choice. At number 8, we've got City Burials. Came out 2020, that wonderful year. And this is a very good album. It's a very good album, I think. It's, you know, good songs most of the way through this album. I think there's not many dud songs anyway. It's just a sign we're getting now. The Katatonia albums, I think, are very consistent, very high quality. City Burials is no exception. I mean, Behind the Blood, what a track that is. Rain is another one I enjoy. Untrodden, superb track on this album. I think it's just a very, very good... Again, this is more in the accessible era of Katatonia for me, I think, City Burials, but it didn't disappoint me in 2020. I think it might have even made my top 20 albums at least. Possibly on my original list, if I remember rightly, it was my number 10. So it's an album I still enjoy. Next up, at number 7, another controversial pick. Because even though I like their Death Doom era, I don't sort of glorify it as much as some other Katatonia fans. And this is Brave Murder Day coming in at number 7. Yeah, anyway. I can understand the album's classic status that it has, and I think that is pretty justified as well. Like, I'm not saying it's not, but it's just not to my taste really, a lot of stuff on this album. It's interesting though that that's the case, because this album has a sound that reminds me a little bit, particularly with Michael Ackerfeld singing on this album, his harsh vocals anyway. Sounds a bit like Morning Rise from Opeth, some of this stuff on this album. I'm like, this has got a bit of an Opeth Morning Rise when I was revisiting this album again. Yeah, just not an album that I think is slightly less for me, but it is at my number 7, so it's still pretty high in a sense, and I still do enjoy this. I mean, I think tracks like Day, Murder, I really like, you know, I think it's End Times, the closing track on this album as well is very good. So it's just a really good album, but it's just not one that I think I love as much as some of the others. So at number 6 is my favourite album from that trio of albums I've been talking about. This is Tonight's Decision from 1999. And I think this is a real dark horse in the Katatonia discography. I don't think it gets as much credit as it deserves. Tonight's Decision is a really good album. Lots of really good songs. This is where I think they got the songwriting right. Perhaps, you know, has some of the best songwriting to date in Katatonia's career for me by the time you get to Tonight's Decision anyway. I think it's better than predecessor Discouraged Ones. Has lots of good tracks. That's, for me, the later part of this album I think is really strong. You know, it's got Strains, Nightmares by the Sea, No Devotion. Lots of really good songs. I like the opening track for My Demons as well a lot. It's an album that deserves a bit more credit than it maybe gets, but then again, Katatonia generally deserve more credit than they get as a band. So at number 5, we move on to one of their more modern, more recent albums, Dead End Kings from 2012. An album that for me was, you know, one of my first albums with the band, as I remember, and I fell in instant love with it. I heard Lethian, and that was it. I just knew this was a band that I was going to love, and I wasn't wrong. Just, you know, by this point in Katatonia's discography, they've got that Tool sound going on a bit more. By the Tool sound, I mean the slightly offbeat, slightly strange time signatures coming in. It's got some heavy riffs coming in. They're blasting you more with heavy riffs and stuff. But you've also on this album got a mixture of that with their more softer, melancholic, beautiful stuff. By this album, they've gone a bit more ambient. in some tracks. You've got more of those electronic touches being incorporated into the mixing or the production of the album as well. And it's just very, very well produced album. Sounds wonderful. And Racing Heart. What about that song? What about Racing Heart? Come on. Racing Heart is such a fantastic track. Dead End Kings is full of them, actually. It's why it's high. It's why it's higher than Brave Murder Dave, and which is controversial, higher than Tonight's Decision. The songwriting for me is just absolutely on point. The one you're looking for is not here with the guest spot from that vocalist. Now I've forgotten her name, Sylvia. I can't remember her full name. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, great album. Number 4 is one of their more popular albums, actually. This is The Great Cold Distance. Man, this album is really, really good. And I do think, yes, it's one of their more accessible albums, but it's a really well put together album for me. It has a great flow. It's no song to me on this album is a dud at all. Pretty much every song hits right. It's just a really well refined, beautifully produced album again for me from 2006, this one. Just check out My Twin, which was actually a hit for Katatonia, I believe. Rusted, July. I recently saw them perform July live, and just the way that first riff kicks in, I could not stop myself from headbanging to it. It's just such a great intro to that track. Journey Through Pressure, great closer. That's The Great Cold Distance coming in at number 4. Now we move on to number 3, which is going to be, I changed this. It was my number 2, and I was like, there's actually one album I think that now, here and now, in this moment, I slightly prefer the other album to this one. This is Viva Emptiness coming in at number 3. Viva Emptiness was for me the first album where I feel that they started to move a little bit more accessible. The songs just got that bit more catchy for me on this album, but they were quite hard hitting. And I like the Katatonia stuff, which has a bit more of those punchy riffs in than just the gloomy, slow guitar riffs. I like the punch. I like the hard-hitting riffs a bit more. So you notice the albums that have those, just because naturally that's slightly more my taste. I like a riff, I like a good hook, good vocals. I like just that hard-hitting stuff coming into the mix here on Viva Emptiness, that it does a little more for me than on some of their previous albums anyway. So it just has that punch, it has that bite to it. That's what I love about Viva Emptiness, but not just that, it has the songwriting too. And the songwriting is also on point by the time this album came out. So Viva Emptiness is full of just stellar tracks again. And by this point in this ranking, it's going to sound like I'm a broken record, because just the albums are just full of terrific songs. Great songs, from the starting song to the closing song pretty much. And it just boils down to taste by this time in this album ranking. So, it all boils down to taste anyway, to be honest. But yeah, so Viva Emptiness, you've got Arrival, I think. You've got Complicity, Evidence, Omerta. You're just spoiled by the time you get to Viva Emptiness, I think, in the discography. So next up, number 2, got the runner-up, which is Night is the New Day. And I think there almost seems to be a lot of agreement in the sort of Katatonia fandom. I often see this album ranked high. Night is a New Day is a really great album. It's another one of their more recent albums, being 2009. It's just got, again, track after track is excellent. From the opener, Forsaker, through to the closer, Departer. Departer, very gloomy, very depressing, but beautiful. And that's for me the difference, actually. But Katatonia, by this point, I think they perfected a lot of their sound for me. And Jonas's vocals on Departer, I think, are really fantastic as well. And just the sound for me comes together better on a song like Departer than it would maybe on a song from, say, Discouraged Ones, for instance. They've just got their sound perfected for me. Just sounds so polished, sounds so clean, sounds so beautiful. And that's why I probably like... Actually, it's a rare case with a band where actually I like a lot of their later albums. Maybe a little bit more than their earlier ones here, but that's just how it works. For my list, my personal list here, so Night is a New Day comes in at number 2 as a runner-up here, which leaves one album for number 1. And I suppose this was predictable if you know my channel well, and you know that I rated this my number one album of the year it came out, 2016. And this is Full of Hearts, which is their more proggy album, right? Being a bit of a progger, you could probably see this coming. You know, I just think this album is special. It's kind of special to me. Perhaps it wouldn't be everyone's choice because, you know, it's a long album. Again, it's very gloomy, but I just think it has so many interesting nuances to it. They've sort of incorporating some of those later dynamics that Katatonia have, but adding the great songwriting in. You add in just gorgeous soundscapes throughout all of these tracks on this album. Add in Jonas sounding as good as he ever has, for me anyway. And you just have a series of beautiful melancholy like no other melancholy you experienced. Maybe exaggeration, then again, I don't think so. Let's look at the track list. Take Over, Old Heart Falls, Serene. Just some of my favourites I'm reading off here, not all of them. Residual. Residual is, for me, a song that doesn't get talked nearly enough in Katatonia's discography. I can't talk properly now. Residual is absolutely mind-blowing to listen to for me, and I don't know why it's not talked about, but anyway, what a song. You got Last Song Before the Fade and Pass are on here as well. For me, it just has all the songs I really love, perhaps just slightly more than some of the other albums. That's why it's made my number one. So that's it from me. Hope you enjoyed the video. Do drop a like and subscribe if you want to, I guess. It just helps the channel, support the channel, and supports more videos like this. Otherwise, from me, take care everybody. Until next time, bye for now.